In at number 10, we have the Chalik Ethereum, and in my opinion, this creature really does have to just make this list, because, like, when you look at it and its taming method and kind of how useful this creature is, but also how much more useful this creature could be if it did get a TLC, it really makes me feel like this creature is in dire need of one. Maybe a slight change in the tame method would be sufficient. Maybe don't make it just a normal knockout tame, but maybe have some kind of different feeding material for a passive tame to make it more accessible to actually tame, because getting that beer is certainly something, but, you know, maybe that it gives the creature some sort of character to just its general identity, so maybe that one go ahead and that's fine. But if it has just some general quality of life improvements, and actually for me it is mainly the tame method when coming back to it. If it had a more accessible tame method, if its rocks maybe did some more damage and were slightly more aimable, that's probably just my part, that could be useful. And maybe if it had some maybe like an extra special ability or something like that, it could really bring this creature together. And I'm actually keen to hear what you think your ideas should be for these creatures and what TLCs they should actually get. Next up, we have got the Basilisk, and I feel like this is such a cool creature when you think of it, but when you actually maybe use it in practice, it doesn't really hype up to everything. And partly I think it should have some better mobility overall, maybe some extra abilities on top of what it already has, maybe allow it to deal more damage. I think the tame method is fine, it makes sense. It's a little bit irritating, but considering what kind of creature this is, you would probably expect that. I'm fine with it. If they did want to change it in future with a TLC, that'd be fine, but that's not usually what TLCs are about. It'd be adding some extra special abilities and like more maybe utilizing that underground ability even further, and maybe like an ability to send shockwaves and knock back creatures under the ground and like leap up under them and just demolish them. You could definitely use some really cool features with that as well, which aren't currently in the game. Now, next up, we've got the Giga, and I feel like it's a time at this point where this creature needs some sort of TLC, and maybe it's not in the most dire need, but I really feel like compared to the Microraptor and other creatures like that, it's very far behind in just what this creature is and what its abilities are like. And yeah, I know it's a lot easier to tame than the Microraptor in most cases. It's in some ways a lot more resource intensive because you need all of those trank arrows, but it's not as laborious of a method and less things can kind of go wrong in the taming of this thing. But I still think it's quite dated in how it works as a creature compared to something like Archo. I'm not saying like make it exactly like that creature, but maybe if it had the stats of like a wild Giga, maybe you'd still keep that rage buff if necessary. Otherwise, remove that, as you know it's quite a big hindrance, and the Microraptor doesn't have that. And I know I'm relating it a lot to that creature, but Ark is a different game now than what it was in 2016, so this creature, it has a lot of dated things about it, which is why I'm putting it on this list. I'm not saying like maybe it's in the most dire need of TLC, but I really do think Wildcard should give the Giga at some point a reconsider over, because it's such an influential Arc tame, and I think it deserves something. In at number 7, we have got the Carb Enemies, and I put this thing here as I think it could be a really useful starter tame. It kind of already is, but it could be even better if it had just a little TLC, and maybe increase its movement a little bit, give it some special abilities, possibly some kind of spinning attack that could stun some enemies underwater, maybe give it some better gathering features, possibly something like that. You could even maybe give it the pack buff in a pack. I know it's not really the most useful thing. Again, very keen to hear your ideas on what TLCs you think these creatures should get, and what actually other creatures which I haven't put on this list, which you think you need TLC should actually have. Personally for me, if it had some kind of special attack on top of it, its saddle is fine. Not like it, yeah, the cementing pace is a little bit of a hindrance. You could make that a little bit cheaper, but it kind of makes sense. It is a good underwater creature. I'd say maybe boost its speed a little bit, add maybe more of an essence of damage, maybe make these things better turret soakers. There are just so many good opportunities with this creature, which I think Wildcard kind of misses out on, and I feel like it could be a really high step of a level over where the Parasol was. And the Stego is such a different creature now to what it was before it had that TLC. And if the Carb Enemies could go under similar treatment, maybe if not as OP as the Stego, it could be a really useful thing for the Carb Enemies to have. And I personally think it's quite underrated and people don't give it enough credit, and if it had that TLC then maybe it would bring this creature to some new heights. Next up we've got the Angler, the king of harvesting any kind of silica pearls, but personally I think it can be used and remembered for a lot more than that. It can be just a really great, agile, maybe higher damage dealing creature with some other wealth of abilities, and maybe it could do something with obviously the main thing that defines an anglerfish, which is the light on the front of it, and it could possibly do something. But I'm not actually sure how much it illuminates, but if it would be kind of useful if you could really use it to illuminate your way in the night, that would be quite nice. If it had some kind of basic saddle and armor, that would boost it up another level, and some more special abilities, because all it can really do is attack and just gather some silica pearls. And I feel like you can be really inventive with this creature and its design. Although yes, maybe it's not the most dinosaur-like creature, I still think there's a lot that can be done to this creature to improve it in everything that it stands for, instead of just being a good silica pearl gatherer and just your generic basic ocean tame. At number 5 we got the Packy, and this creature really just has to be here for me on this list. And it's kind of sad looking at this because it's so useless, but with just a few simple changes it could be a much better creature. Firstly, if it could gather berries, that would put this thing at significantly better heights for general use. Also, I think the mobility of this creature is fine. Its special attack could be utilized in a better fashion if you had more mobility when it was actually charging, because it's not particularly OP. If it dealt a little bit more torpor, that could be nice. If its taming method wasn't so long and laborious, that would make this creature a more defined, useful one. And if it had some maybe special harvesting abilities or some kind of buff it gave other creatures, or something small like that, like a buff and obviously the ability to gather berries and just a tame method that isn't as difficult, then it could really boost this creature in terms of its abilities and where it actually is in the game, because you can just get a Parasol and that creature is going to do so much more good. And it took absolutely ages to kill this raptor. Personally, I do think these things should deal a little bit more damage just to the general creatures, possibly because they are quite heavily armored creatures. It would make sense. Next up we've got the Archaeopteryx, but I'm also going to put the Galley in a similar spot as well, as I think the Galley is just lacking in the health department and a bit of damage as well, although it doesn't really need that, and some weight definitely that could drastically improve that creature. And again, maybe a special ability of sorts, maybe like an extra dash. But talking about the Archaeopteryx, since the glide suit came out, and the cinema crops after that as well, this creature is pretty much just useless, and it's just an old version of those two things. If you could use this thing like a cinema crops though, and as sort of an alternative to that creature on other maps, as the cinema crops isn't on every map, then it could really boost this creature. It could just be a better use of a creature. You can still use it like a hang glider, but then you wouldn't have to carry it. It could just go on your back normally. And yeah, there's a few things that you can do with this creature which can turn it from something completely useless to something like the cinema crops. At number 3 we've got the Megaloceros, and the female version of course, not the male one. That's a good thatch gatherer. Personally, I think, yeah, maybe this is only really used for breeding just Megaloceroses, but you could at least do something with this creature. It can't even attack. It has no attack whatsoever. This is in dire need of some sort of TLC to actually be a useful creature. Apart from that one use, which isn't even really utilizing this creature, it's just essentially using it as a placeholder to make baby Megaloceroses, and then if you get female babies out of that, it's not good. You only want the male babies out of it to get good thatch gatherers and whatever you use general male Megaloceroses for. The female one, it's just, yeah, maybe it doesn't have all the horns and all of that, but I still think it should have some sort of edge, which would be like, why you tame this creature apart from just, oh, I want to breed some Megaloceroses, so I'm going to get both of these. And I know generally most art creatures don't have distinction between both genders of creatures, and considering this one does, I feel like Wildcard could do something with this creature to really highlight those differences, and you'd have different uses for both instead of this one just being like utterly useless and obsolete. Next up, we've got the Microraptor, and the reason why I'm putting it so high on the list isn't necessarily because I think it needs the most amount of TLC, but I think its ability is quite a cool and interesting one, and if utilized properly, it could really make this a good sidekick. Again, you just have this just like maybe on your back or on your shoulder. I think you can actually put this thing on your shoulder, but if you have it on your back like a Cinemacrops or another creature, I'm just trying to think there. I think the Seeker, whatever it's called, has that same sort of ability. Actually, don't. I think that's in a mod, but still, if it had that, and then you could just send it on riders, and then it would come back onto you, so you could knock people off their riders, and then it would come back to your back. That could just be a really cool, simple ability for this creature to have. And in at number 1 is the Areno, and there are so many things that you can do cool with spiders, and I'm kind of going to put the Onyx here as well, although maybe if you turn the Onyx into something more like the Desmodus, but maybe a slightly dumbed down version that was easier to tame, that could be very useful because that creature is pretty much obsolete. With this creature though, the Areno, if it had the ability to climb up walls, something simple like that, and it actually dealt some reasonable amount of damage and had some decent health and all things like that, then it wouldn't just be a sort of placeholder obsolete creature which you would only tame if you wanted to tame every creature on Ark, and it's actually just a generally huge pain to tame this creature, so I'd recommend a slight change in that taming method. And if you could do that and make this sort of like the Bloodstalker but have some distinction, it could be a really great creature. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I want to know from you, what creatures do you think need TLC, and what TLC ideas do you have for these creatures? As always, comment down below if you agree with this list. If not, put your 10 down in the comments below, and with that, I'll see you all later.